When I was young, yes, I did accompany my pa quite a lot. I joined the army when I was 19 or 20, and of course that then removed me. So I was not around then. But occasionally I'd come back on leave and would go with my father and visit, not necessarily the S&D, although he covered the S&D an awful lot. He went all over the country. Well, it all started originally because he took still photographs. He didn't really approve of cine. And he went and saw somebody else's cine film, I think of an air show, which was 16mm as opposed to 8. And he was so impressed with this, he went out, we are told, the very next day and bought a Kodak cartridge loading camera, which he didn't keep for very long because the clockwork only worked for about 15 seconds, because there's nothing electric in those days. And I've actually got his camera here. This is the Bell and Howell which he used, which takes, I forget what length of film, but the spool is only as big as the inside. There's a spool top and bottom. But the total film in this camera lasted, I think, less than 4 minutes, or just on 4 minutes. You've got a handle here that comes out, and you wind it up. And the longest it would run for was about 30 seconds. And this is 16 frames a second. But normal filming is 25. But because my pa wanted to make the film go a bit further, he did it between 16 and 18. And the only problem with that was occasionally you got a bit of a judder. But with modern technology, we've managed to hide that in most of the videos and the DVDs. Yes, I mean, it was, he had not only selected the locations, but he knew a lot of them. And he would practice panning the camera, always on a tripod, so it's always still. But he would practice the pan before the train came to make sure that it was right. But there are certain places where I'm sure there were dimples in the ground, where the tripod went every time in the same place. And it was a bit strange because occasionally he would find a place he did not like.
Yes.
And he would not go back there.
Yeah.
He had locations that he loved. I mean, any pictures of the station here, a lot of them were taken from just up the line over the loading gauge, looking down over the station. But yes, he knew the line very well. And as I think Wally mentioned to you, he used to not exactly race trains, but he was quite quick between one location and another, yes. Well, he had an Agiflex, but I'm not sure. He had 2 other cameras, and every now and again, one of them, which had a blind shutter, he had problems because the blind used to judder. And occasionally, if you look very carefully at some of the pictures, there's a line down the side where the blind shutter has actually caught, and therefore is. But his cameras, I think he gave them away, because I never actually, although I've got the cine camera, I never got any of his still cameras. What he used to do on occasions was he had set the camera up, the cine camera, and set it going on the train coming, and so press the button. He'd then take a pace to the side, pick up his still camera and go click as it went by. Because although the cine camera was on a tripod, the ordinary camera very often wasn't. He did his own developing. He had a daylight developing tank, and I remember visiting him in the Royal Crescent, and you'd go in and the door wouldn't open for a bit, having pressed the bell, and then the door would open and he'd say, come in, and he'd be standing there with this black box in his hand, giving it a twist every however, and there'd be a stopwatch running somewhere, and he'd be saying, I can't talk to you for a bit because I've got another. And I forget how long it was, but he only did the actual developing. Printing was done by a series of people. Every year he put together an album, and I've got a couple of examples here. But the album, the pictures themselves, he very rarely sort of framed a picture and put it up on the wall or anything like that. He had other pictures on the walls, Cuneo prints, things like that. But no, there was on his desk perhaps a lot waiting to go into an album, but not a lot about. And he was also meticulous on recording everything that he'd taken. So if you were to ask me, was he doing anything on the 1st of April 1950, I can look and tell you exactly where he was and what he was doing and what he took. Knowing what the picture is that you're looking at, and my pa was meticulous. I've got here, this is an album from, when's this? 1950. For instance, the first album is 1949. There are pictures before that, but they're not recorded. He started recording seriously in 1949. But here you see we've got a picture here of the Down Western WR local leaving Twerton Tunnel, 460 number 4091 Dudley Castle, taken on the 29th of May. That picture actually appeared in one of his books because there's a stamp in there saying so. And at home, not here, but at home I could dig out the little book that shows what else he took at that location that day, what the weather was like, what the exposure was, all the details of that picture. These albums used to go down the line. When at the end of the year, when he put this album together, this would be taken to Bath Green Park and handed over at Bath Green Park, and it would then go down the line, not to all the stations, but to all the intermediates. So as you went out to Bath, for instance, you got to Bath Junction, where there wasn't a station, but there was a box. Yeah. So this would first stop off at Bath Junction, and the guy would look at it there, signalman would look at it there. It would then go on, next stop I suppose would be Midford, and they would look at it there. And it went right down the line and then came back again. And I'm not sure you could do that now. I wonder whether it would come back at the end of it. One of the albums, there's a little bit in the front, and it's one of the battered albums, I have to say, and it says, "Please treat this album with great care. It fell out of the signal box at a station which better remain nameless." Some of his shoots were purely, it's a nice day, oh yes, there'll be something in, you know, half an hour so-and-so. Other times he would actually plan it meticulously and would go with friends, and it would be a trip out for a complete day. A lot depended on the weather. A lot of people say that if you look at my pa's films, it's always sunny. It isn't. There isn't, of course, an automatic meter or anything on the camera, so he had a Western meter. And I've got a photograph somewhere, but not with me today, of him literally with the Western meter being held out to see what the light is doing. But it was, yes, you had to be methodical. And it, again, like unlike modern cameras, it's not something that, oh dear, that's no good, we'll try again. I mean, I know that the S&D these days fits into two little discs, which are DVDs, but these are the three cans of the Somerset and Dorset. Literally, I've got part 3 is on top, Windsor Hill Tunnel to Broadston. And this, in here, this is part 3. There is the film itself, all carefully wrapped up because it's being cleaned. And again, I was talking earlier about the notes. In the side here, we've got, that's a photocopy, that's my pa's original writing, and tells you on there exactly what is in this can. And with the combination of the cards that are in the tins, and the albums, of course, because I could then turn up the pictures and get the stills, and very often that gave me a name of who it was. But that is a lot of money, I suppose, but that's how the edited film ended up. Modern cameras, I mean, as long as you've got a good battery, they work. With my Pa, it was a matter of making sure you had a film in, and enough film. You had to keep a very careful account of how much film you'd use, because it was only 4 minutes. If you'd used 3.5, you'd only got 30 seconds left. So you had to, in that way, plan exactly what you were going to film. You then had to make sure, of course, that you were wound up, you had the right exposure, and some of the crews helped because occasionally they would make extra smoke. Sometimes they wouldn't help by opening the regulator and occasionally beating him to the next location, which happened now and again. But in fact, it was a very friendly line, and a lot of people did cooperate. Occasionally, my father would get somebody else to actually work the camera. Occasionally, he would line the whole thing up and say, when the train passes that point there, press the start button on the camera. And don't pan, or do pan, whatever. And a couple of cousins used to help. So occasionally, you do actually see my father in shot, not very often. Equally, on some of the black and white stills, I've got the train is there, and in the foreground there's this gentleman bent over his camera on his tripod, and that's my father. I would love to have seen, though, what he could have done with a zoom lens. But he knew, again, he knew where to go and how far away the train would be, so as he panned round, the train didn't completely fill the picture.